Kephart presented his paper, this was the paper on pioneer life in Pennsylvania, in December 1901, and it was published in 1902. The opposition between city and wilderness had reached a sharper focus in Kephart's thinking. Kephart acknowledged many writers who appreciated the joys of open-air life in a wild region. Byron, Walter Scott, Robert Louis Stevenson, Francis Parkman, George Frederick Ruxton, Theodore Roosevelt, John Muir, etc. Excerpts from many of these same writers appeared in a small notebook that Kephart kept during these same years. The notebook was entitled The Joys of Barbarism. That particular notebook is in the Pack Memorial Library here in Asheville. He was perhaps thinking of Thoreau's essay entitled Civilization and Barbarism. The title page of Kephart's notebook proclaims, "I love the wilderness because there are no shams in it." Clarence Miller, his assistant, says that in 1923, Kephart's aura of loneliness just deepened and his trips to the Ozarks increased. His son Leonard wrote that in 1898, Laura and the children stayed in Ithaca longer than was their normal summer visit, and that he started first grade there. These extended retreats into the wilderness and his absences from work alienated the board of the St. Louis Mercantile Library. Frank Cruden was a friend who was librarian at the St. Louis Library, wrote that the board had been very tolerant of Kephart's behavior, but they couldn't stand it any longer. In the autumn of 1903, the board demanded Kephart's resignation. Miller said that the library staff was taken by surprise at Kephart's dismissal. Miller tried to help his old boss by enlisting the aid of his father, an associate editor of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. According to Cruden, this is the St. Louis Public Library librarian, the causes of Kephart's troubles were, quote, bad habits, i.e. excessive use of tobacco and other narcotics and stimulants, end quote. Cruden's diagnosis reflects one of the prevailing theories of the time. In fact, Kephart's father wrote in an award-winning essay on the evils of use of tobacco by Christians. In addition to injuring a person's health, squandering wealth, and being an annoying social habit, the senior Kephart asserted that tobacco caused digestive problems, including dyspepsia, and that the dyspeptic can neither enjoy life nor trust God. Cruden also told Koopman that Laura Kephart had left Horace for a second time about a year before. According to a newspaper report in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch dated March 25, 1904, Kephart lived, quote, as a recluse, spending most of his time writing, end quote, following his resignation from the Mercantile. In mid-March 1904, though, he decided to join, on the spur of the moment, a group of friends for a hunting trip. His companions, Charles Wise and A.S. Keevil, owned a shooting lodge, Bryant House, on Establishment Creek, about 50 miles south of St. Louis. On Friday, March the 18th, 1904, he joined the party of Wise, Keevil, O.R. Van Kleck, and A.B. Bennett on a steamboat heading down the river. They had good shooting on Saturday and Sunday, and on Monday, March the 21st, Van Kleck and Bennett decided to return to their home. The weather was stormy, and with the creek swollen, the return trip for the two men was hazardous, which seemed to make Kephart very nervous. He also refused to eat anything, and he did not drink. The St. Louis Republic reported that, quote, about 1:30 o'clock in the morning, he jumped out of bed and, rushing into Wise's room, declared that Sicilian workmen had surrounded the place and were going to blow it up with dynamite. Wise tried to quiet him, but he still declared that he could hear the men on the roof. Wise thought it was a joke. Then Kephart picked up his shotgun and began blazing away through the walls at the imaginary foe. When his friends realized that he was in, quote, unquote, bad way, they decided to bring him back to the city as quickly as they could. This meant a 3-mile tramp to the river, for we did not want to take the boat along the tortuous creek, then a 7-mile road down the river to Modoc, opposite St. Genevieve, to catch the railroad home. When they got to Modoc, Kephart did seem calmer. They had lunch, took the train home, and Kephart took a streetcar back to Kennett Place. Kephart's bad way followed him back home. Quote, Wednesday night he alarmed the household by insisting that burglars were seeking to force an entrance. Later in the morning he again gave a similar alarm. Thursday morning, after sleeping a short time, Kephart seemed to have recovered himself and left the house, apologizing for the disturbance. He explained that he had been visited by ghosts. Kephart was hospitalized with a nervous breakdown on March 25, 1904. The St. Louis Republic broke the story with the headline, Kephart Lost Mind on Hunting Trip. The front page column, surprisingly intimate in detail, portrayed the agony of Kephart's nervous breakdown and his psychotic delusions. The St. Louis Globe-Democrat reprinted the contents of a suicide note that Kephart wrote, and the other daily paper sent a reporter to the hospital to interview the obviously ill Kephart. The St. Louis Globe reported on March 25th that Kephart was arrested near the St. Louis landmark Eads Bridge after giving a suicide note to a bartender. In the note, which was addressed to W.H.H. Anderson, actuary at the St. Louis Mercantile Library, Kephart said that he had been driven insane and that he would end his life. He explained that, quote, I have not been driven to it by trouble of any kind whatsoever. All reports that may be circulated after my death to the contrary notwithstanding. Instead, he described how he had been persecuted and pursued by fiends and devils who are, quote, deliberately and by slow torture, end quote, driving him insane. Additional details were given in the St. Louis Republic the following day. The reporter for the Republic who interviewed Kephart in his hospital room seemed to have no qualms about broadcasting Kephart's paranoid delusions to his St. Louis readership. According to the reporter, this is in late March 1904. According to the reporter who interviewed Kephart in his hospital room, he seemed to have the report had no qualms about writing this. Then, according to the reporter, Kephart said that his friends had turned into fiends who were trying to control him with a powerful battery. They have put on as high as 230,000 amperes and attach one vital part after another. They make the rain talk. The trees call out to me in threatening tones. When I was in the woods, they made the birds call me names. They are fiends, those two men who were with me down at Establishment Creek. That's like something out of Dante, the birds and the talking trees. This is someone, Dan, who's in much greater difficulty than previous accounts of Kephart's life that would have allowed. He's got symptoms maybe of bipolar sort of things. He's certainly in very difficult, dire straits. So that when he came